First Spin. Welcome to First Spin, a show where I learn how to use the parallax propeller without having any prior programming experience. Rather than do this on my own, I have enlisted the help of two experts.
Yep.
Yup.
So
That's,
let's see.
The Whisker
Yeah.
and the Roy.
Yeah.
Hi, Whisker. Hi, Roy. We are now at Roy's house.
Theoretically.
In
theory.
Or Yosemite.
Yeah,
We
we're
haven't
time
quite decided
traveling
yet.
because we had to record the stuff before we went on the road.
Uh-huh.
We are bringing our production studio with us to record a bunch of live shows from the expo and Roy's house and Joe Grand's house and who knows where else we will land. But this will be up and online for you guys to listen to on the day that we're actually in San Diego visiting Roy in person.
Right. Right.
Or like Addie said, maybe we'll be in Yosemite.
Which would be pretty cool, actually. Do we get would we stay in a cabin?
No.
Oh.
In fact, staying there, if you hadn't booked it already last year, you don't stay in the place. You stay at one of the places outside.
Roy gets the bottom bunk.
Oh. I like the top.
Most likely, if we go there, we probably stop there for
a couple
half
hours
the day or something,
Uh-huh.
and then finish going and get to my house super late and just sleep.
I'm going to be
see.
taking
Guys,
medium format photography at Yosemite. I need to grow a really big beard.
Okay, Mr. Ansel Adams.
That's awesome. Let's do that. Okay, but this is not first road trip. This is first spin.
Okay.
Sorry, guys. We're just, again, terribly excited.
Are you really that excited to get into bitwise and ors, XORs,
No,
and Boolean ands and ors?
not at all. Not at all. Although I do happen to like pipes. I've always liked the symbol pipe. You know, the pipe symbol?
Uh-huh.
I mean, it's a
Little
straight
vertical
line,
bar.
but it's so simple. I like it.
Yeah.
It's clean. Yeah. So, okay, let's start with bitwise and.
Okay. So, if you remember, we've already gone through bitwise stuff in, like the knot we went through quite extensively a few weeks ago.
Mm-hmm.
So, and is the and operation on each bit in the two operators to the binary. So remember we talked about the left and the right operator and the operators in the middle.
Yeah.
So when you do an and, you take your left and your right operands,
Mm-hmm.
and for each bit in them, you and them together.
And that is
And the result goes in. The result is the anded bits.
okay. So then a 0 and a 0 becomes a 0, but a
Right.
1 and a 0 or a 0 and a 1 becomes a 1.
No, with an and,
Oh.
they both have to be the same.
Oh. I see. So 0, 0
So-
is 0, 1, 1 is 1, 0 and 1 or 1 or 0 is 0?
Also 0.
I
So
see.
the only thing that's 1 is when they're both 1.
I see. Oh, so it's so X has to be this case and Y has to be this case. That and.
Yep.
Right.
You're
And
talking
so in
about
order to get-
Boolean truth
I
tables,
see.
which if you need to cheat, you can, of course, type Boolean truth table into Google and probably get
Well, that's easy.
pictures
this
very
is easy
easily.
enough.
Or you could go to page 164 in the manual and it has the truth table for and.
It's like those third grade papers, those problem solving things where you're like,
very simple stuff.
if Mary has
Right.
5 apples and Tim has 3 apples, how many apples are there together?
Well, that's
No.
not the same as this. 'cause
Well,
that's
whatever.
addition.
Whatever.
This is just to be clear, we're talking about the bits. So for all 32 bits,
Right.
the 0 bit on both of them are ANDed together, then the 1 bits on both of them are ANDed together, and the results of all that go into the result.
Right.
So
right?
you're doing 32 ands,
That's pretty impressive.
and then the result of all 32 are put in the same order into the whatever it's being assigned into or
Right.
whatever.
Okay, I get it. I understand.
And
You
so
can
then
also use this in line with like a comparison sort of thing, right?
Mhm.
So you could be anding two numbers together, and if the result is a 0,
Mm-hmm.
then it would be false.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
I see.
one of the things to just touch on, because we've touched on it a little bit here and there, is when you're doing an if or a while or a do while, anything where the operation is going to change flow control based on a Boolean result.
Mm-hmm.
So normally you'd like say if x equals 5, right? Equals 5.
Mm-hmm.
That is going to do the thing inside the if, because x equals 5 is a Boolean result of true, which is -1, all the bits on.
Mm-hmm.
If you do some other math operation that results in an output that is 0 or not 0, it will also just work out. So, if you had x plus equals 10 and x started out -10, the result is 0. So it won't do what's inside the if, because the result is 0, which is false.
Okay.
It's just any math that you do that results in a 0 is the same thing as saying that it's false.
Okay.
And in a lot of cases, anything that is not 0 is automatically promoted and treated as if it's true or -1 when it's applied into a Boolean result situation, like on an if or a while, or in other expressions that, in the case of these the next two operators we'll get to in a minute, with the and the or, that are the Boolean version. So we keep going back to that, and I just want to make sure we explain that they're interchangeable. They often aren't interchanged just because it's not as clear.
Mm-hmm.
But you it's not exclusive. Like you can mix the two together. You just have to be careful when you're mixing them, that you know what you're doing with and how the results are going to work out with each other.
Gotcha. Okay.
That's all I wanted to just interject that,
Okay.
so that people would know.
Sure.
So the next bitwise operator, the or,
Mm-hmm.
is really similar to and, except that it uses the or operation, which you almost described when you were describing and at first.
Okay.
So or is if either of the bits are 1
Mm-hmm. Then
between
it's
the
1.
two, then the result is 1.
Okay, so 1,
So
1 is 1, 1, 0, 0, 1 is 1, and then 0, 0, 0.
Right.
Okay.
So in this case, the only one that's not 1 is the one that they're
0,
both
0.
0.
Right.
Right.
Okay.
And so that's the same thing. Now, XOR is a little different. It stands for exclusive OR.
Okay.
And the truth table for that is they have to be different, is the simple way to say it.
And if they're different, then it's
then
true?
If they're different, then it's 1. If they're the same, then it's 0.
So if they're both
So
ones, it's 0. If they're both zeros, it's 0.
See. Now, do you guys remember way long ago when we were talking about architecture, like in pins, communicating and all that, how if, I guess it was an OR, right? It would have been OR of an OR function. If one pin was on and another pin was off, then those two together would be on.
Well, that was, I believe that was when we were talking about the clock counter stuff, the counter.
I think she's going back even further, talking about what happens when more than one cog does out
talks to, yeah.
Right.
So that'd be an OR?
Yeah. The output is an OR operation, yeah. So all of the outputs from all the different cogs on their out A register are ORed together to actually be applied to the pins.
Oh, look, guys, it's coming full circle.
Yes.
Right. So in that case, if any one of them is 1, then the output is 1.
And of course, that's a little bit different of an OR statement, because instead of 2 inputs, it has 8.
A bajillion.
Yeah.
Well, it's got 8 of them because there's 8 cogs, and it's 8 for each pin. There's 32 pins, obviously, but so there's 8 inputs.
32 ones or zeros for 8 cogs each.
I see.
Yeah.
Okay, I get it.
Whereas this operator is just dealing with 2.
Okay.
Right.
So let's okay. So let's get back to XOR. Sorry. So XOR is 1 1 or 0 0 equals 0 and
Right.
1 0 0 1 equals 1.
Right. So it's basically if they're different, it's on, and if they're not different, they're the same, then it's off.
Okay. Now, see? It wasn't that bad.
Well, we still have to get through and or and
Now,
all the other.
on the XOR, on Eddie and I's YouTube channel, where we post Toymaker Television, the username is Whisker, but I took out the E and replaced it with a 0 because somebody had already stolen Whisker.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason it's an X0R is XOR,
Why do you do that, though?
because the usual one was taken, but I
Right.
wanted to have it as close as possible and still be sort of, programmer related.
Why do
So,
hacksaws do that? Hacksaw.
It's just a,
just because of this.
It's just because the XOR thing, yeah.
Oh.
In
It's
this
used in
case, yeah.
encryption a lot.
Oh.
XOR
Yeah.
is.
Oh, that's weird.
Yeah.
So,
One thing that's interesting about XOR is if you XOR something with a value and then XOR it again,
with the same value, you'll get the original value back out,
right?
which is why it's useful for encryption.
Oh.
So you can take a number, you can XOR it with something that you know
Yeah.
to get a different number, and then keep that number
Well,
that
that's
you
the
knew
key.
and don't give it to anybody else. It's the key. You take that
Ah.
encrypted number back again, you XOR it with the same number that you did originally, and it turns it right back into the original plain text.
That's
Right.
really cool.
So you run across a like 8-bit ASCII, right?
Yeah.
And you have a big long key, and you go through the key step, and the key wraps around itself beginning to end.
Uh-huh.
So say your key is like 8 bytes long.
Yeah.
So you're on position 0 in your ring of 8 bytes.
Yeah.
And you use that one to XOR the first byte of your plain text.
Yeah.
And then you go to the next position and do the next character with that. And you just keep rotating your key around, and you roll it over like a cog going across a chain
Yeah.
over the whole thing.
Yeah.
And then you've got your encrypted text, and you send that off to whoever. And as long as they've got the same key, they can roll it across again, and they get the same plain text back out of it.
Tricky.
Right.
I see.
But you have to have that perfect string of keys
Yeah,
to be able to get it
otherwise-
out.
Right.
Right.
Very interesting.
So now that we've lost all of our followers because you went off explaining cryptology,
Well, I'm sure there's a lot of people out there that I'm sure are interested in that. So that's the
Oh, yeah.
basic version of it, and it's useful to know because when somebody says a 32-bit encryption key, that's what they mean. It's 32 bits long, and it just rolls over whatever you're encrypting. I mean, there's a lot of different ways to approach it, but that's the simple way.
Sure.
right.
And that's,
So
you can do that with a prop. So,
Right.
if you want to encrypt something with your propeller, that's one way that you can do it.
Cool.
There you go.
I dig
Yeah.
it.
So this next series of 8 operators are all Boolean operators, some of
Uh-huh.
which you have already used just because you've used an if, right, with the equals or the less than or greater than for comparing
Yeah.
some values,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
And so the and the or are different from the bitwise one because they don't operate on the bits, they just operate on the true and false results of a Boolean comparison, right? So if you have, x, say you did if x equals less than, or if x is less than 5, but you also wanted to check to make sure x was greater than 3, right? Instead of doing a separate if, you could just go, if x is less than 5 and x is greater than 3, do something.
Okay.
And what that's doing is the result of x is less than 5, if that's true, and the result of x is greater than 3, if that's also true,
Mm-hmm.
then they're both true. So and is, if they're both the same, then the result is positive. So it's true.
Okay.
If
So
either
then.
one of those is not true, then the result is false. So it's false. So it's the same as in the logical sense, it's the same as doing the bitwise one, where it uses the same truth table. They both have to be on for it to be on. They both have to be true for it to be true.
So how would you write your example with the and equals?
Well, let's hold off on the and equals. Let's make sure she's got the and the or done first.
Oh.
Right. The alternate versions there, the assignment operator on comparisons is really kind of a unique thing to spin that's not really commonly used. And it's kind of it's a shorthand to be, it can be used to shorten your code, but it's going to make your code very difficult to follow in some cases.
Okay.
But let's just stay with the basics for now. So you follow that I took the case where I would have normally had two different ifs, one after each other.
Yep.
Inside to do that double comparison, and I turned it into one by using the and. Right.
Yes.
So I made it so if x is less than 5 and x is greater than 3.
So and or are both useful for when you want to have more than one test to get yourself into an if.
Yep.
Right.
Okay.
And they're the same kind of thing. It's basically, so with an or, if either one of them is true, it will go in. So if you had, in the case with that same example, if x is less than 5 or x is greater than 3, it would work for any value in that particular case, because either x is less than 5, which includes the values 0 and 1 and 2, or x is greater than 3, right? So it's like they cover each
Overlap.
other. So it's not a very good example.
But I get I get what you mean though.
I think you can make this more complicated by doing the not in front of them to get your NAND and NORs as well.
I could.
Look, it's not on the manual. I guess we shouldn't cover that.
Well, this show isn't about covering the manual. It's about covering your brain with knowledge.
Later. Next week.
But as you get the idea, though, is that
yes, I do.
You can combine multiple checks, multiple conditions using and or to create a complex situation.
If your left sock is on and your right sock is on, you can put your feet in the shoes. Right, if your socks are on or your socks are off.
Well, you're changing it. If your left sock is on or your right sock is on, then eat goulash.
Right. That makes absolute sense.
Dude, Whisker has goulash on the brain.
I guess it is.
For the last few weeks.
I guess that's true. I think yeah. I'll have to make some. Otherwise, he's going to be talking about it.
I have to have some of Addie's goulash before we leave for California.
We will.
I'm not going to make it 2 weeks without that stuff. It's magic.
Don't worry.
So, just to, now we'll kind of go into this whole assignment with these. So you can think of a situation where you have, two expressions.
This is so bad. Don't ever do this, people, ever. It's so bad.
Really, so say you have X and it's, some value. That's 5. It doesn't really matter because it gets promoted if it's not 0. It gets promoted to being true, which is -1.
I see.
And if you do and equals in this case, so you have X and Y, it's going to take X and Y in the Boolean sense. So if X is not 0, it's true. If Y is not 0, then it's also true. So X and Y is true.
Yep.
So it's going to assign true into X.
Yep. That makes sense.
It makes sense, but what happens when you start putting it into an iterative loop where it's happening more than once?
Right.
And it's changing over time in magical, mysterious ways, and your code starts doing crazy stuff. Because
the key thing to remember, though, is that it's promoting any non-zero value to -1 for being true.
Right.
So the X at the end of this is going to equal -1 because that's true.
Right.
And so if you're mixing your math, you'll end up with some very odd results than what you might have planned on with these kind of operations.
Okay.
So in general, most people don't use. I really haven't ever seen any spin code yet that has these Boolean comparison type operations with the assignment wrapped in.
You'd have to be a little bit crazy to use these. Just a little bit.
I think part of the reason that they're here is just because the spin compiler can do assignment on any binary operator. So it's just doing it for all of them.
Just because you can doesn't always mean you should.
And there's probably some reason like
Oh yeah, you could
Chip
do
covers
some
everything,
crazy
and
stuff, but
you could do some interesting things with these.
Ye-
But in general, I would stick to just the normal usage of them.
Sure.
Um,
That's easier to
and-
read anyway.
right. And so the next few are the ones you're probably fairly familiar with as far as equals, meaning
Well-
are the two things equal to each other?
Yeah.
And then the less than, greater than, which is not equal.
Yeah.
So
I'm
if
used
they're
to
not
used to doing the exclamation mark equals sign for
But
that.
that's not equals in spin.
I know. It's like not even part of spin. It's like
Right.
I
That's
don't know,
the
some other
standard in
language.
C.
the C++ language,
Yeah.
C#, some
This
of the
is
other languages.
this is one of the operators that a lot of languages are still in a lot of argument over. They
Really?
all
The
not
so many
equal?
of them, yeah, so many of them do not equals differently.
I would do a pipe equals.
No, that means
No, but
something
that's
else. Yeah, that's
Well, I know, but it should be because,
Bitwise
you know,
order with assignment.
like when you write it, or like a slashy equals, because then it's like you're putting a slash through the equal sign.
I'm used to it being less than followed by greater than is what I'm used to it being,
Oh,
which I
like
think is the
this?
same as
Yeah.
in spin.
That's what that is. Yeah.
Right.
But that's what I've always, almost every single language I've ever used, it's been that.
Yeah.
Well, that's typically the basic has that,
I see.
and other forms of basic. But if you're coming from the land of C and its derivatives, then not equals is actually the explanation point equals.
Right.
So, and it's good to bring that up because a lot of experienced programmers who are learning spin
Mm-hmm.
will mess that up and their code won't work or it won't even compile in that case. And they'll be like, what's going on?
Right.
So it's just a good idea to bring that up. And same is true for the next two where you have the less than or greater than.
Mm-hmm.
The in C, the assignment version of these, where it's
Mhm.
got less than equals,
Mm-hmm.
doesn't do assignment in C. It's the same thing as saying equal to or less than.
Ah, I see. Sure.
So you have the equal to or less than and equal. In C, those are the same and they're synonymous with each other.
I see.
And I've been bitten by this because I've written code and I'd be, in spin and I'll do the less than equals.
Mm-hmm.
And instead of doing the comparison that I expect, it does the comparison and then assigns it into my variable.
Which is, a very, very subtle bug that you could look at 1,000 times and not
not-
realize why it's doing what it's doing. So
Right.
be very, very careful with your equal sign and make sure that if you want it to be an assignment, it goes after in spin.
Right.
Always
That's what I was
after.
going to say. In
And-
spin, basically all the assignments have the equals at the end or after the
And
operation.
If you
Mhm.
want to
Comparison.
do is equal to or less than, or is equal to or greater than, then you need to make sure that the equal sign is before at the beginning.
Right.
Okay.
And so that covers those and the obviously the less than, greater than, or equal to or less than, or equal to or greater than. I mean, you've used some of these already in your examples. I've seen your code on
Mhm.
the videos,
Mhm.
your Toymaker videos.
Yep.
So you're pretty familiar with most of those. And again, the assignment version of these, they all are there. They're just really, I would suggest not using them at your level of experience until
Mm.
you find a use where, hey, if I did it this way, and even doing that, I would still put in a comment right at the code describing what you're doing, just so it's very clear.
Sure.
Like if you use something like the equals
What is
sign,
that?
You're doing a Boolean compare of two things to see if they're the same, and then applying the result of that into the first one.
Right.
Most people don't do that.
Right.
So if
Right.
you use that sort of thing, you need to make sure you put a comment on that kind of line.
Okay.
And
Right.
if you do something crazy like equal sign greater than equal sign, I've never seen that ever used in code.
Yeah.
But, it could be useful for the right algorithm. So,
Right. Well, all of these could be useful if, especially in the case where all of the stuff you're doing is Boolean operations, right? So you could do Boolean math with this, and it shorthands it. It's just that most of the time, Boolean math is really only used in coding. It's used for deciding flow control,
Mm-hmm.
right? So
So
it's on your if or on your repeat while or whatever, you'll have these Boolean expressions. And so you don't really want to do an assignment in that case, because
okay.
you're just doing a comparison to check to see, should I do this or not? And you don't want it to mess up your, assign a value into one of those two variables.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
So can we
and
do like examples for the assignment portions of these?
well, okay, yeah. So for any one of these, so like for the equals one,
Yeah.
if you had x equals y,
Yeah.
right? So what's going to do is it's going to do the comparison of x equals y, which is just if they're actually equal to each other, that's true.
Uh-huh.
And if they're not equal to each other, it's false.
And then
And then what it's going to do is put true or false into x.
X. Okay.
So you can see how it would be useful.
Right.
Right.
It's just I haven't seen it used.
Sure.
But, I could see, a million places where it would be useful if you remember that you can do that.
Right.
Right.
So then if X not equal to equal and then the equal sign Y,
Right.
It'll do the operator first. So
Right, which is not equal. So if they're not equal to each other, that's true.
right. And then they'll make X as true.
Right. It'll assign
Okay.
it into the left operator,
Okay.
operand, which is x in this case.
So if X is less than Y, then true, and then it would go into X greater than Y, true. If it is, then true, go into
Right.
X. I see.
Yeah, all these work
That's
the
easy
same
enough.
way.
Yeah.
It's just a matter of understanding the operations, right?
Right.
Once you understand the operations, it's easy to understand the assignments. Now, figuring out useful ways to work this stuff into your code, that's a whole nother thing.
Right.
Okay.
And again, just like I said, for the beginner coder or even the intermediate coder, these assignments on the Booleans are typically going to be something you'll want to avoid doing, just because you'll confuse yourself. I mean, I would confuse myself using these, and I consider myself a fairly advanced programmer.
Worth at least $5.
At least.
My boss seems to think I'm worth a little bit more than that, but okay. Luckily, you're not my boss. Might not be able to afford my house in San Diego.
Yeah, well, I wouldn't pay you $5. I'd just be like, you want some goulash? Like, I
You
can
got
score some
goulash
goulash.
on the brain. What in the world?
Oh, so we got through all of the operators.
Woohoo! I feel accomplished. Let me do
How
a
much
little
time do we
dance
got
here.
left?
Not enough to get into the next section, no.
Yeah.
So you got any other little questions this week?
No, I think I'm good actually. I'm comfortable with these binary operators now.
Yeah, they're not so bad once you break them down, really. It's
Yeah.
just a lot of the same.
Right.
Yeah. And I mean, even, I've been coding for a really long time. I've been doing spin for a couple, 3 years or so. And I still, for some of these operators, I still just go look them up because I want to be sure I'm doing the right thing.
Right.
And for me, the added complication is that, I'm doing C every day at work,
Right.
C++, and I have to
Switch
double take on some of them because they work a little differently here than my C code,
Right.
C++ code.
Right.
And, I've been doing that kind of programming for 25 years. So those operators are all ingrained in my brain, and luckily wherever they overlap, it's easy for me. But when they have some differences,
Then it
I
gets a
mess
little,
up.
yeah.
I have to go look up the operators and figure it out.
Sure.
So it's not that big of a deal to have to look them up.
Sure.
A while back, I had to redo our website, and it was this sort of situation where I was learning HTML5 and the newest JavaScript. So those are two different languages that sort of do markup and some programming sorts of stuff, and they're very different. And on the server side, I was doing PHP, while at the same time I'm doing this show trying to help Addie learn how to do Spin. And I would love to learn PASM, but I use so many different languages every single day trying to do this stuff that it's just like Roy said. Sometimes it just gives your brain just absolute horrors trying to remember. Okay, which language was the blah blah blah? I don't even try anymore. If I'm gonna be using something, I've got the manual open so I can look at it.
Sure.
Right.
That makes sense. That's why I have one. Huzzah!
You're sticking with Spin for now, and that's it.
Sticking with it, and yep.
All right,
That's what I
so
got.
that's it for this week. You can find this show every week at firstspin.tv. We put it up on Tuesdays, even when we're on the other side of the country.
Indeed.
So you can get that automatically to your phone the second that we put it up. There's an RSS feed and all that sort of thing there. Nice iTunes link too, so you can automatically get it on let's see, your iPad, your iPhone, all those sorts of things. Your
iDevices.
Your
iDevices.
music player of choice.
Correct.
All right, so that's it for us, and we will be back next Tuesday.
Till then.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.